Hey, what's up? Welcome to House Church. Man, I'm thankful that you're here tonight. And look, I'm really excited about our conversation. I think it's going to be a great one because we've been talking about identity for a little while now, right? And the idea of identity we're talking about is like who or what a person or thing is, or a definition I really like is a set of characteristics or beliefs that make a person or thing unique. Like what makes you unique? What makes me unique? How do we want to be identified? How do we want to be known? And I think this is a really important conversation because as we talk about identity, right, we're talking a lot about value because we find value in certain identities. And so we want to kind of name and claim who we are and who somebody else is so that we can understand the value we hold or the value they hold. And so today, what I want to talk about is really how we understand our identity and how we understand our value through our genders, through male or female. And I think this can be a really powerful conversation because I think there's a lot of probably baggage that we're holding on to when it comes to this conversation and this topic, what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, and how do we understand that in the purpose and calling that God has given us. And so we're going to be in the book of Genesis. We've been talking throughout this whole series, Genesis chapter 1, what it means to be created in the image of God, that both male and female are created in the image of God. And so the big idea that we get to unpack together is that, as male, as female, as man, as woman, we are distinct. We're distinct in our nature, and yet we're fully dependent. We're dependent on one another, and we're dependent on Jesus. So what does it mean to be distinct? What does it mean for you and I, as male and female, to have distinct natures? Well, here's what I want you to know right off the bat. It doesn't mean that we have distinct values because we have equal value, right? Like God breathed the same life into all of us. I don't want to talk about like gender norms, although I will say this might be a powerful thing to unpack in the room tonight is, what kind of gender norms have you kind of fallen under, right? Like I know for me personally, I'll tell you this, man, one of the things, and we talked about this Sunday that I heard all the time, to be a man is to be a provider. And then when I looked at my marriage and I looked at my household, man, for the first 7-8 years of my marriage, I wasn't the main provider. Brooke was. Brooke made more money than I did. And, in some conversations, that might have made me feel like a lesser man. It might have made me feel like I was failing God in my manhood. And the question I want us to figure out is that really what it means to be a man? Is that really what it means to be a woman created by God? And I think there's more. I do. I think there's a lot more. And so Genesis chapter 2, this is what I want us to be able to dive into together. Genesis chapter 2, verse 15 says this, that God took the man, Adam, and he put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to keep it. I was reading this in preparation for the message, and one of the things that just jumped out to me is that God didn't place Adam in the garden for the good of Adam, but God placed Adam in the garden for the good of the garden, that there was work, that there was cultivation for Adam to do in the Garden of Eden. And men, I think the same is true for us, that God has called us to be cultivators. More than providers, more than protectors, God has called us to be cultivators, to do the work, make the tough decisions maybe, so that others can flourish and can grow. And that might mean a lot of different things for you depending on where you are in life, right? Because I think where you are in life is the garden that God has placed you in. Your home, that is a garden that God has placed you in. Your wife, your kids, it's a garden that God has placed around you at work, in the locker room. Like these are gardens that God has placed us in to cultivate, to dig in, to help others grow. And so maybe that means making some difficult decisions so that your kids can find some healthy life rhythms and life habits. Maybe that means sacrificing some things of yourself so that your wife can grow in her giftings or her passions, right? Like, what does it look like for you to cultivate? Talk about that today. What does it look like for you to cultivate the garden that God has placed you in and the people around you so that they can grow? We don't just see like man's unique creation. We see woman's unique creation here in Genesis chapter 2 as well. Verse 18 says that, then the Lord God said, it's not good that man should be alone. I will make a helper fit for him. And the story goes on, they rolled through all the created creatures and animals, and there was no helper suitable for Adam. There was nothing there that could help Adam in the purpose. And so God created Eve. God created woman to be a helper. And now listen, it's important we understand that word helper there isn't like a subject. It's not lesser than. It's not a sidekick, right? Like all throughout the Old Testament, that same word is used to describe God as a helper to the Israelites. And the idea here is that Eve wasn't placed in the garden for a purpose unique from Adam's. No, she was to help in the same purpose. And it wasn't just that it was Adam's purpose. It was their purpose. As man, as woman, as humankind, as mankind, they were given a purpose, and Eve was to help in that purpose. They were pursuing the same purpose. And what we see is we look through this and what it means to be a cultivator and what it means to be a helper. We see kind of like both of these purposes and callings are outward facing, right? Like to the good of those around us. And yet when we get into chapter 3 of Genesis and we see sin come into the world, that sin then takes that purpose and turns them inward. And now we struggle with the idea of being cultivators for others because I just want to cultivate my own life. And we struggle with the idea of like helping in one purpose because I want to live my purpose and my calling. And what the gospel constantly pulls us back into is a unified pursuit of the purpose that God's placed in us. Sin has caused death, and it's caused pain, and it's caused conflict, right? When you read Genesis chapter 3, as God talks to Adam and Eve about the sin and the result of their sin, like we see the first instance of strife and conflict, like gender strife and conflict, where God tells Eve, like, you're going to desire things different than your husband, and it's going to cause tension, it's going to cause battle. That's a result, that conflict, man, that's the result of sin. And so what Jesus does in his life throughout the gospel is Jesus restores what was broken, right? So where death was brought into the world, Jesus brings life. Where pain was brought into the world, Jesus brings purpose. Where conflict was brought into the world, Jesus brings calling. And so as we are, again, we're distinct, and yet we're dependent. We're dependent on one another to experience the fullness of God. We're also dependent on the life of Jesus because, and let's be honest, we can't do this without him. That's kind of the whole point, right? Like we need his redemptive work in our lives so that we can be the cultivator and so that we can be the helper that God has called us to be. And man, I think whenever we can begin to wrap our minds around and really begin to understand what it looks like to cultivate those around us, what it looks like to press in, to lean in, to help so that we're pursuing one purpose, then man, the force of the church is male and female together in a unified calling and purpose. That kind of work, man, it changes the world and it changes the community. So I'm excited about this conversation. I'm excited about where it can go. Man, I can't wait to hear all that you talked about. I can't wait to hear, man, how we're growing and cultivating and helping. I love you. Man, I'm excited for you. I'm thankful for you. We'll see you soon.